Hi, everyone. Today I wanted to talk about Macbeth. Some additional thoughts on Macbeth. I did interview Dr. Parkinson about Macbeth, so please refer to that video for a more in-depth conversation about Macbeth. So, after recently rereading Macbeth, I think what Macbeth is about, its major theme, is about desire, and it's about one's inability to control desire, uh, human desire, worldly desire, sensual desire. Uh, Macbeth's main desire is to become king of Scotland, and he does, and the desire grows over time through repeated action. He murders many people to solidify his kingship, and he says, I think I need to do more, because really to gratify desire for worldly ephemeral things, there's always doubt, right? Something could always change, something could always happen. To either lose that desire, the object of that desire, or just in some, or just for it, in some way to go away. So there's always the fear of losing it, and Macbeth definitely fears losing this ephemeral thing, this kingship, um, and so he commits acts to try to rid himself of that fear, in his mind, to solidify him as King of Scotland. Now, I think the reason Shakespeare writes Banquo is a counterpoint to Macbeth. Banquo is given similar information from the three weird sisters, the three fates, essentially, that he will be the father of a line of kings. And later in the play, he has a dream that increases his desire to do something about that. But he prays to God that that is removed from him. So not only does he not pursue action, he also prays to God. He recognizes that desire is a powerful thing, and that through God, through his relationship to God, that is what removes that desire. So, and Macbeth has a relationship with divinity, quote unquote, but it's with darkness, though. It's with goddesses Hecate, the weird sisters. It's with malevolent, evil deities or entities. And so this will cause his suffering, right, on a spiritual level. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, desire. So, horses have been the images for human desire, human impulses. They move, and the desires move, horses move, and it causes us to act, to move. And during the night of, before we see, or before it's mentioned that Duncan is murdered, people are talking about the weird things that happened during the night of Duncan's murder. And one of the images is of horses escaping. And I believe someone says the horses escaped and wrought war upon nature. And desire does this. Desire not only wreaks havoc with your spiritual nature, but it also wreaks havoc with your human nature. It causes a degradation of consciousness over time if it is continuously acted upon. So, and those horses eventually eat themselves up, the speaker says. So this is an image of a human being destroying themselves. And this will be seen with Lady Macbeth and with Macbeth, destroying themselves through desire, through repeated action of gratifying selfish, worldly, sensual desire. And so, again, one's nature, as I mentioned, becomes degraded. So at the beginning of the play, Macbeth is seen as a valiant warrior uh, for Scotland and for King Duncan. But over time, through his desire, through his ambition, his selfish ambition, I think Shakespeare is saying, don't have ambition, but guard yourself against selfish ambition. Um, so through his selfish ambition, he degrades over time, and he commits acts that will degrade him, that go against human and spiritual nature. The murdering of others, the manipulation of others, the selfish use of others. So he starts out as a valorous man. Eventually, he degrades to a beast, to a bestial nature, and Shakespeare references that, uses the images and words of beasts to describe Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And then eventually he devolves even more into the demonic. His relationship is with malevolent, like I mentioned, malevolent entities, deities, darkness. And Lady Macbeth in the beginning, right, says, "Fill me up with cruelty from head to toe, you murdering agents." So at every level of their existence, they're completing action, they're thinking about negative action, and they're invoking a relationship with divinity, but from a negative aspect, from a demonic aspect. So at all three levels, they're going to suffer. And so you do see that eventually. Lady Macbeth suffers mentally, but it manifests itself in physical, repetitive, obsessive, compulsive action. With Macbeth, it's mentally, my mind is filled with scorpions. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he says. So suffering in the mind. And then Lady Macbeth commits suicide, and Macbeth, has that soliloquy about really depression, the tomorrow and tomorrow speech. So these are suffering on the spiritual level. They lack happiness, they lack contentment, they lack bliss, enjoyment of life. So this is where they suffer spiritually. So what does the play Macbeth say about how to combat desire? One I want to mention, they do reference breath in Macbeth, and I think the Shakespeare writer references breath in many of his other plays, and from a yoga point of view, breath, the control of breath, is a technique for stilling desire, stilling the mind, which then makes ego aware of soul. So controlling a breath may be something that Shakespeare is pointing to. The other one, definitely, for sure, I think that Shakespeare is pointing to a way to combat desire, is contentment, is meditating on contentment, being content with what you have, being content in every aspect of life. Now, I don't think Shakespeare's saying don't progress, don't go after things, but I think he's going after things, meaning growing. I don't think he's saying don't do that, but I think he's saying don't do that from a selfish desire, from a selfish ego perspective, trying to gratify oneself. So in the Gita points to the only way really you cannot be trapped by work and by selfishness and ambition is to do everything for God, is to have an attitude where you are doing the work for God, but also actually that God is the one doing the work, to try to have that attitude throughout every action that you commit throughout life. So again, contentment. So you will see the word content in Macbeth. Probably the best image of contentment is that conversation between Macduff's wife and Macduff's son. Macduff's son says, I will live as birds do. And his mother says, well, what do you mean by that? He says, I will live with what I get. Again, this is an image of contentment. And of course, in the New Testament, Paul references, I think, contentment is one of the fruits of spirit, being content. So I think that's what Shakespeare is saying about how to combat desire, contentment. So also, there is the theme of limitation in Macbeth. You will see references to confinement, limit, and I think Shakespeare has a twofold meaning with this. I think from the soul's perspective, desire limits, confines. Desire confines the soul. It limits the soul. It takes the soul away from its inherent divinity and infinity. And desire forces, the soul and the ego and the soul through the ego to focus on that particular desire or many desires, the gratification of those desires. The other meaning, I think he means with, the stricture, the limitation is discipline, is disciplining the senses. So through willpower, being able to, meditation on qualities such as contentment, but also using your willpower to restrain yourself from letting yourself act upon desire. So I think that's the twofold meaning. One, the soul is confined through the ego, through desire. And then the other one is discipline, being able to hold the reins of your impulses, being able to hold back, not give into those impulses and act out those impulses. And so I did also want to talk about, it's not so much in the desire versus consciousness realm, but the third murder, the identity of the third murderer. Harold Goddard, a writer, a literature critic, wrote a wonderful book called The Meaning of Shakespeare many years ago. I would highly suggest picking that book up if you want a greater understanding of the Shakespeare works. But he brings up the question, who is the third murderer? So Macbeth talks to two murderers, sends them out to murder Banquo and Fleance. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name. But then a third murderer shows up. And one of the murderers asks, well, who sent you here? And the third murderer replies with the one name, Macbeth. So when Shakespeare has one name, he is referencing that character or identifying that character. Two other things Goddard points out that lead to his belief, and now I believe that Macbeth is the murderer, is before the murder scene. Macbeth says, so he's at a party. They're having a party at his castle at Inverness. And he says, everyone go to their rooms for the evening until we have dinner. It will make our socializing sweeter that way. So that gives him time to leave the castle, join the two murderers to ensure that Banquo and Fleance are murdered. A second clue is the third murderer talks about Banquo's riding behavior. He knows his riding behavior. He says, well, I know he rides either a certain distance or a certain time, but then he cuts himself off and says, but as all men do. So right there, he's limiting himself actually from revealing himself as Macbeth. So I think the third murderer is Macbeth. And Macbeth does not follow the two murderers after Banquo and Fleance, or excuse me, after Fleance. They do murder Banquo, and Fleance escapes, but it's the two murderers that go after Fleance. The third murder does not. And this suggests that gives Macbeth enough time to get back to his castle. And in the subsequent scene, you do see Macbeth talking to the two murderers. They do say that they murdered Banquo, but not Fleance. And of course, he says, with that information, I am now cabined, cribbed, and confined. Again, imagery of limitation, of being trapped. So those are some of my thoughts about Macbeth. Let me know what you think. What are some of your thoughts on Macbeth? Well, again, what is Shakespeare saying to us through the play Macbeth? Thank you all. Bye-bye.